If you're interested in science, new ideas, or thought-provoking conversations, chances are you've come across a clip promoted by the World Transformation Movement featuring the Australian biologist Jeremy Griffith. The clip I refer to is an interview between Jeremy Griffith and British actor and broadcaster Craig Conway, in which Griffith presents his explanation of the human condition. It serves as an introduction to his magnum opus, Freedom, the End of the Human Condition. The interview is broken into 4 parts and goes for a little over an hour. There's a transcript available of the discussion, and the podcast version is on Spotify or available on the World Transformation Movement's website. I'll put the links to these in the description of this video. One criticism is that the endorsements are too effusive and exaggerated, making the viewer skeptical from the start, while the counter-argument is that it might actually be as critical as it claims to be. I would argue that what the World Transformation Movement is presenting might in fact represent a bastion of hope for humanity. The insights offered by Griffith shed light on numerous aspects of life, human behavior, and our world, providing immeasurable clarity and understanding. And given the natural resistance to new ideas that challenge deeply held beliefs, actively endorsing such information may therefore be seen as both necessary and justified. But does it represent a key insight, or is it simply a lot of hot air? Here then is my review of Jeremy Griffith's presentation of his instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition as presented by the World Transformation Movement in the interview that solves the human condition and saves the world. If you like this sort of content, let me know by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel, and feel free to drop a comment below. The interview begins with Craig Conway setting the context, noting that it took place during the pandemic. He aptly states that the turmoil and trauma of this pandemic has only amplified the now dire need in the world for a deeper, lasting solution to all the chaos and suffering in human life. This reflection resonates deeply, as the pandemic period indeed prompted many to ponder the larger questions we face as humans on so many levels. Conway then introduces Griffith, asking him how, as claimed by Professor Harry Prosen, his work will save the world. So, we're getting straight to the point of it all. Conway's genuine engagement and interest in the subject are evident as he shows his copy of Griffith's book and mentions that it's always with him. Griffith then comes on with a macro statement that contexts his work.
Finding understanding of our psychologically troubled human condition has actually been what the efforts of every human who has ever lived has been dedicated to achieving and has been contributing to finding.
We're, of course, reminded of the Holy Grail concept originating from Arthurian literature. Griffith emphasizes the importance of a biological perspective, arguing for a non-abstract, non-mystical, completely rational, and thus understandable scientific biological explanation of us humans. While this may challenge those who view the world through a spiritual lens, it underscores the need for a clear scientific understanding of the human condition. He then explains his instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition, using the analogy of a migrating bird, Adam Stork, and addresses the traditional excuse for our aggressive, violent, and selfish behavior, which is that we have savage instincts, in part 1 of the video. In part 2, Conway starts by asking why this seemingly obvious instinct versus intellect explanation isn't taught in schools. He also inquires how our distant ancestors became cooperative and loving, and importantly, how the psychological rehabilitation of the human race actually occurs. Griffith addresses the first question in part 2, with parts 3 and 4 dedicated to the subsequent questions. I'd encourage you to watch it for yourself, like if only for interest's sake. Rather than a blow-by-blow analysis, I'll provide in this review what I believe to be the 5 key takeaways from the discussion. Here then are my key takeaways from the interview. Firstly, this challenges preconceived notions of the biological drivers of our behavior. So much of the discussion out there that looks at the drivers of our behavior, like from a biological perspective, centers on the need for sex, food, shelter, and dominance. For example, evolutionary psychology is predicted on our behavior being driven by Stone Age instincts that were selected for because they instilled a reproductive advantage. And modern humans have a newly developed system, our conscious mind, that we use to overcome and guide such forces within us. Jordan Peterson, for example, argues we have a dominance hierarchy, instinctive system within us, which explains much of our behavior. Go and check out his discussion on Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube to get an idea. I'll put a link to it in the notes. Well, Griffith flips the script on this notion entirely. He argues that this is a convenient excuse. He explains there is a psychological dimension to our behavior. We don't suffer from a genetic, opportunism-driven animal condition, but a conscious mind-based, psychologically troubled human condition. We humans developed a conscious mind, and to fulfill its potential, we needed to go in search of understanding. But our instincts blindly resisted these forays into the unknown. Not being able to explain why we diverged from an instinctive set of behavior, this left us insecure or psychologically upset. Griffith argues our selfish, egocentric behavior stems from this insecurity, not from competitive and aggressive primal instincts. 2. Jeremy Griffith's instinct versus intellect concept is not new. His extrapolation of it, however, is. Griffith explains that the idea of a conflict between our moral instincts and conscious intellect resulting in an inner turmoil is not a new one. Indeed, it is highlighted in one of civilization's foundational texts, the biblical story of Adam and Eve. Furthermore, quoting from Richard Heinberg from Memories and Visions of Paradise, he explains,
"Every religion begins with the recognition that human consciousness has been separated from the divine source, that a former sense of oneness has been lost. Everywhere in religion and myth there is an acknowledgement that we have departed from an original innocence and can return to it only through the resolution of some profound inner discord. The cause of the fall is described variously as disobedience, as eating of the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge, and as spiritual amnesia, which is forgetting or blocking out, or denial, alienation, which is our psychosis."
This is Richard Heinberg discussing this further from a clip on YouTube from 1991, which I'll also provide a link to in the description.
The paradise story, or a story of a lost golden age, is found in virtually every culture's traditions. The Hindus called the first age the Krita Yuga, and of course in the Krita Yuga there were no gods or demons because all human beings were already saintly and already in communion with the sacred dimension. Similarly, the Native Americans speak of the first age, or the first world, as a time when people lived in harmony with nature. It was a time when it's said that people saw themselves as here to bless and nourish the Earth Mother. The Greeks spoke of the first age as the Golden Age, and one could go on and on. I have yet to find a culture which does not have some kind of tradition about a golden or paradisal age in the beginning, at the time of our first ancestors.
Griffith then references some beautiful passages from the Greek poet Hesiod, who lived around 800 BC, and Plato from 360 BC, who both wrote of our species' pre-conscious state of innocence. Firstly, from Hesiod, "When gods alike and mortals rose to birth, a golden race the immortals formed on earth. Like gods they lived, with calm, untroubled mind. And from Plato, there was a time when we beheld the beatific vision and were initiated into a mystery which may be truly called most blessed, celebrated by us in our state of innocence. He goes on to mention more contemporary thinkers such as Eugene Marais, Paul MacLean, Arthur Koestler, and others who recognize the basic elements involved in explaining human behavior. So the instinct versus intellect theory for our behavior is not new. What's new is Griffith's notion, his scientific treatise, of why we departed from our original state of innocence, which he illustrates in the Adam Stork analogy. He points out that explaining this has only been possible in the last 150 years or so through scientific discoveries into the nature of how genes and nerves work. We've come to understand the following. Firstly, natural selection. Darwin, Wallace, Mendel, and others gave us the understanding of the natural selection process. We learnt that favorable genetic traits to suit environmental conditions are passed on through subsequent generations to give species orientations to the world. Orientations is an apt term employed by Griffith. And secondly, the nervous system. We know that nerves have memory. There is a capacity to remember events. We can sufficiently understand the relationship between cause and effect to become conscious of, or aware of, or intelligent about those relationships. And we have developed to the point of being the only fully conscious species. However, what remained unexplained was why the conflict between the instinct and the intellect occurs. Griffith addresses this by explaining that while gene-based, naturally selected instincts provide species with automatic responses or orientations to the world, only the nerve-based conscious intellect can comprehend cause and effect. This ability to understand cause and effect allows the intellect to manage and adapt to change. When the fully conscious mind evolved and began making decisions based on understanding rather than instinct, a conflict arose. The fixed, unchanging instincts became intolerant of the mind's new capacity for experimentation and decision-making. And as a result, a fundamental clash developed between the instinctual and intellectual parts of our nature. This understanding of why the conflict between our instincts and intellect occurred that Griffith presents is crucial because it ends the division between our divided selves. It allows a paradigm shift in our self-perception. It's Griffith's ability to extrapolate the reason of why this conflict occurred that is so significant, in my opinion. My third key takeaway from the interview: there is a subconscious burden of guilt that defines our species. This is a bit slippery to quantify, but Griffith argues that without the ability to explain why we corrupted our idyllic past, our species has been living under a burden of guilt. We've had no ability to explain the different systems which we work under. Our newly developed conscious mind was given the task to search for knowledge without an ability to explain why, but proceed we had to nonetheless. This left us condemned by our loving, cooperative instincts. We couldn't justify our divergence, so we attacked, tried to prove we were good and not bad, and blocked out the criticism, anger, egocentricity, and alienation emerged. It became an overwhelming subconscious sense of guilt that we couldn't face nor explain. And unable to do so, we developed the convenient excuse for our divisive behavior. That is, we had aggressive and competitive instincts that we needed to contain. Having the knowledge to explain why we had to diverge from our innocent past was the missing key. It lifts the great burden of guilt that we couldn't face. Our insecure behavior is no longer justified. We are no longer defined by some internal struggle. We become outward-looking. My fourth key takeaway from the interview: dogmatic insistence to be good is actually regressive, not progressive. Griffith coins the term pseudo-idealism. He explains that
while dogmatically insisting that everyone should be cooperative and loving could make you feel that you were doing good and be superficially, psychologically very relieving, such insistence on ideal behavior denied people the freedom they needed to be able to continue the all-important upsetting search for knowledge.
Griffith argues that only through a biological explanation of the human condition that provides the relieving understanding of our condition could we hope to make an actual and lasting change. And finally, my fifth key takeaway from the interview. Our behavior, our human condition, is not a fixed state. This is perhaps my most important point. Griffith explains that if it were true that our instincts were aggressive and competitive, and that our conscious mind served to control such behavior, we'd be forced to live with the fact that we should just do our best through rules, laws, self-discipline, management strategies to control our behavior. But that's not the case. Our instincts are, in fact, based on love and cooperation. It's insecurity that drives our behavior. Understanding in context alleviates the misunderstanding we carry. We can identify the root cause of our distress and dysfunction and no longer have to act it out. We can heal with understanding and ameliorate our inner distress. That, to me, is what makes this an exciting concept worth exploring. In conclusion, there is certainly a lot of hot air out there on the internet. Jeremy Griffith's explanation of the human condition rises above this morass and presents a unique and valuable insight into the human condition. In presenting his work, the World Transformation Movement represents a bastion of hope for the human race, playing a critical role in providing this information for free, it should be stated, on its website. In a time of fierce skepticism and trepidation, such actions are indeed commendable. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Feel free to give this a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you'd like to receive more content like this in your feed, and would love to hear what you think in the comments below.